Hi friends, welcome again to the channel Studies in English Literature and Language. And today our topic of discussion is Henry Louis Vivian Derozio's well-known poem, The Harp of India. And in this video lecture, I will provide you an analysis in my own way of this extremely popular poem written by Henry Louis Vivian Derozio. Now friends, as far as Indian English literature is concerned, it is generally assumed that it starts from 1835. That means the year when Macaulay starts his minutes. And now, based on the historical and political situations of India, M.K. Nayak, one of the important critics of Indian English literature, has divided Indian English literature into 4 periods. The first period is from the beginning to 1857, that means from 1835 to 1857. 1857 is important as it is the year when mutiny by the Sipahis was conducted. And second phase is from 1857 to 1920. 1920 is important because it is the time when Mahatma Gandhi emerged as one of the pioneering nationalist heroes in the Indian scene. Next is from 1920 to 1947. 1947 is important because in that particular year India gained its independence from British rule. And the fourth and the last phase made by M.K. Nayak is from independence and after. That means it is still going on. Now, as far as Indian English poetry is concerned, Indian English poetry is roughly divided into 2 phases, friends. The first phase is from Derozio to Aurobindo, and the second phase is from Nishimichikiel to onwards. That means the second phase is still going on. Now, what are the characteristics or the tendencies of the poets of the first phase? That means the poets that started from Henry Louis Vivian Derozio and the tendency that continued till Aurobindo. In the first phase, you will find that the first phase Indian English poets, they romanticized their subjects. They imitated Western poets as their models, and they basically endowed nature with a kind of celestial apparel, and they were subjective in the treatment of their themes. So these are the basic tendencies of the poets of the first phase. Now, as far as the biography of our present poet, that means Henry Louis Vivian Derozio, is concerned, you will find that Henry Louis Vivian Derozio was born in the year 1809 on 18th April, and he was a Eurasian. His father belonged to the Indo-Portuguese family while his mother was an English. And you will also find that he studied at the Diamond School in Calcutta, and that school was situated near Esplanade. And after his father's death, he worked as a clerk in the office of his father, and then he worked on an indigo plantation at Bhagalpur. And this phase is extremely important for the flourishing, for the efflorescence of his poetic career, because in Bhagalpur he came in contact with the common Indian life, with the fakirs, with the natural beauty, and it helped him. This experience extremely helped him to write poems. And then in 1828, after returning to Calcutta from Bhagalpur, he started to work at Hindu College as a lecturer. He was a young lecturer in English and in history, but he was sacked from his job in 1831. Why he was sacked from his job, friends? Because in Hindu College he made his students logical. He helped his students to go against some customs of Indian life, and that was not tolerated by the conservatives, and they appealed to the authority to sack that young lecturer from his job. And as a result, during the board meeting, it was decided that Derozio will have to resign from his post, and he was ordered. And then in 1831, he was sacked from his job. And after 6 months of this mishap in his life, he died of cholera at the age of only 22. And it was also in 1831, and he died on 26th December. So this is the short meteoric life of Henry Louis Vivian Derozio. Now, coming to Derozio's poetic career, we find that Derozio published 2 important poetic volumes at the time of his poetic career. The first volume is named Poems, and it was published in 1827, and the second volume is titled as The Fakir of Janghera, a metrical tale and other poems, and it was published in 1828. Now our present poem of our discussion, that means the Harp of India, was published in the volume entitled Poems in 1827. Now friends, what are the salient traits of Derozio as a poet? Firstly, though Derozio was a Eurasian, he always identified himself as an Indian. He identified himself as an East Indian. Resultantly, there is a profound nationalistic zeal in his poems. Next, as a poet, he was influenced to a great extent by the young romantics or junior romantics like Shelley, Byron and Keats. He was greatly influenced by Shelley, by his prophetic vision. Actually, like Shelley, he regarded the poets as the transmitter of revolutionary ideas. He also considered poets as the prophets of the new millennium. Now friends, as far as the text of this poem is concerned, the poem is entitled as the Harp of India. And harp here is an overextensive symbol. It stands for Indian poetry in general, but in an extensive way, it stands for Indian culture. Now I am reading this poem with you. Why hangs thou lonely on yon withered bough? Unstrung forever, must thou there remain? The poet asks the question, why Indian harp is standing lonely on the withered bough? And it is unstrung, and the poet is stating that will it stand in that way forever? So what the poet presents in the very first 2 lines, the poet presents in the very first 2 lines a kind of moribund condition of Indian poetry, or in an extensive way Indian culture. Thy music was once sweet, who hears it now? Why doth the bridge sigh over thee in vain? The poet says that the music, that means Indian English culture or the Indian English poetry, was once harmonious. But now breeze is still blowing over that harp, but it is producing nothing harmonious. Silence hath bound thee with her fatal chain. under the imperialistic rule, under the colonialists, Indian English culture or Indian English poetry has become totally silent. The voices of Indian English poetry are now muted, neglected, mute, and desolate art thou. And the poet is stating the present condition of Indian English poetry or Indian English culture in extension. The poet is telling that Indian English poetry or Indian English culture has now become desolate. It is now mute and it is now in a fallen state. Actually, the poet is presenting a kind of decay, the decay of Indian English poetry, like ruined monument on a desert plain. And this is the simile, or this is the image through which the poet is describing this decay. In the desert, ruined monument is neglected. It is not watched by anyone. Similarly, Indian English poetry is not nurtured by anyone now. Indian English poetry is now in a desolate state. Oh, many a hand more oath than mine once thy harmonious chords to sweetness gave, and many a wreath for them did fame entwine. Now the poet is presenting the glorious days of Indian English poetry. The poet is telling that when in the past Indian English poets wrote poems, Indian English poetry had a kind of august superiority over every other cultures, over every other types of poems written in other countries. Indian English poems had its heyday at that time, and during that time the poets who wrote poems were garlanded, were given accolades. But that days, those days had become a matter of past, of flowers still blooming on the minstrel's grave. Those hands are cold, but if thy notes divine, maybe by mortal awakened once again, harp of my country, let me strike the strain. And in the last 2.5 lines, what we find that the poet is telling that those days are a matter of past now, but he is hopeful, he is optimistic of the future. He is telling that if he is given opportunity, he will try to revive that old glory. He will try to rejuvenate Indian English poetry from its moribund situation to a kind of glorious future. Thus, what we find in this poem, that the octave starting from why hangs thou lonely on yon withered bough to the desert plain, that means like ruined monument on desert plain, that octave part is giving a kind of decaying picture of Indian English poetry at present time. But the mood of the poet takes a kind of turn from the sestet part when he gives the presentation of the ancient times when Indian English poetry had a kind of glorious past, and that mood is given another hopeful twist in the last 2.5 lines. That means that starts from, but if thy notes divine may by mortal awakened once again, harp of my country, let me strike that strain. In this portion, the poet gives another hopeful twist. He says that he can rejuvenate Indian English poetry once again. So, what we find that the octave gives a kind of decaying picture, but from the sestet part, the decaying picture is totally contradicted. Firstly, by the glorious or sunny days of the past, and then by the poet's presentation, the poet's vision of a hopeful future. So, octave and sestet in after octave comes that volta. That means this turn of mood is called volta. This change from decay to hope, from despair to hope, is technically known as volta in sonnet writing, and Derozio has skillfully used this technique in this poem. Now friends, in order to analyze this poem, one thing should be kept in mind. That thing is that situation should be noted. What is that situation? What is that project that should be noted here? That in 1784, William Jones, you may all have heard the name of William Jones in history. Who was William Jones? William Jones was the man who founded the Asiatic Society in Calcutta. And what was the aim of the foundation of the Asiatic Society? The aim of the foundation of the Asiatic Society was the excavation of the ancient Indian culture, architecture and literature. And with this aim, the members of Asiatic Society, they revived and reread the works of Kalidas and several Sanskrit writers of the golden era of the past, and they tried to show before the world that Indian English literature had a kind of glorious past. Indian English culture had a kind of glorious past. That means this was the project of the British people, to show before the world that India had also a kind of literature, India had also a kind of culture, and India had also a kind of glorious architecture. And Derozio was also influenced by this Orientalist project, and this poem was heavily influenced by this Orientalist project. And here you will also find that Derozio is also trying to show before the world that Indian English poetry is not the poetry of the dead. It had also a kind of lively past, and Derozio wants to relive that past. He wants to refresh that present moribund poetry to a kind of hopeful future. And herein lies the uniqueness of Derozio as a poet. Now friends, I think I have been able to give you an analysis of this poem, and if you like this, please subscribe to my channel and tell your friends also to subscribe my channel. Thank you. Thanks for watching this video.